A week ago, your small colonial town was alive and well. All of a sudden, you and everyone you know wakes up to fever, chills, dizziness, and an oncoming rash all over your body. You immediately know that you are afflicted with a terrifying illness. What can be done? The record-breaking smallpox epidemic in 1721 was a tragic loss of life that rocked families in the small colonial town of Boston and around the world. In addition, it was the worst epidemic of the century, and those who pursued the cure to this torturous disease were put down by society for their frontier ideas. On the other hand, the event was a triumph that brought light to modern medicine, increased free press and information available to the public, and sparked the vaccination regulations implemented in many institutions today.
The smallpox virus plagued the small colonial town of Boston, Massachusetts in 1721 more aggressively than ever before. The small, fragile population of Puritans sought to get away from the corrupt British government, but they could not escape the looming threat of smallpox. Smallpox was first spread to humans by contact with wild animals. People transferred the bacteria to others when they ejected saliva, where the bacteria could begin its journey in the body. The symptoms of smallpox did not normally appear until 2 weeks after an infection. As a result, there was not much people could do to prevent the spread of smallpox, because before they knew it, they were infected, and they had probably infected several others. The symptoms of smallpox begin as a flu-like virus. The host experiences fever, chills, loss of appetite, aching, nausea, and vomiting. After a few days, the telltale smallpox rash begins to form all over the body. Not many otherwise healthy individuals survived, and children and the elderly did not stand a chance against the variola bacteria.
The first introduction of smallpox in Boston since 1702 was by Captain John Fore. His ship landed in Boston after a trip to London, where 7 of his men had been infected by the smallpox virus. 6 men recovered, but John Fore himself and one other crewmate had died. Boston was spared from the disease at this time, but little did they know another ship from London, the Seahorse, would eventually infect the Boston area. Boston had previous outbreaks in 1678, 1690, 1698, and 1702, but this epidemic in 1721 would be the most deadly to date. On April 22, 1721, the Seahorse arrived in Boston from the Caribbean islands. The crew seemed fine the first day, but the next day they were quarantined to keep the infection away, once people knew it was smallpox. When people discovered this, 1,000 fled, and out of those who did not, 5,980 were infected, and 844 died.
In the beginning, the case fatality rate was 14.1%. Boston had 11,000 residents, 7 churches, and 11 physicians. In the past, people who survived the outbreaks had immunity to the disease, but because the most recent outbreak was so long ago, many people with the immunity had died, and newborns clearly had no immunity either. When the epidemic hit in 1721, many people who supposedly had immunity from previous outbreaks mysteriously died. As time got farther away from 1702, the percent of smallpox immunity seemed to shrink as older generations died and new life entered the world. Even from the beginning, the colonists knew that this was the worst epidemic to hit Boston to date. More people were infected every day, and the fatality rate continued to grow month after month. According to Stephen Koss, author of The Fever of 1721, people lost entire families. Children would be parentless. It was devastating. Everyone wanted to know a way to limit the spread of the disease, but when new theories were introduced, they were not well accepted. This included the ideas of Cotton Mather, who decided to use the procedure of inoculations. He heard of inoculations from his black slave, Onesimus. He said they used the technique back in Africa, and it never failed to decrease the percentage of fatalities from a disease. Mather secretly inoculated a couple people, but the colonists did not trust African medicine, so they did not approve of Mather's work.
Mather's ideas were initially ignored by others in the medical field until Zabdiel Boylston decided to perform trials on the treatment. When Boylston started his experiments, some saw this as simply infecting people with smallpox when it was harmful and avoidable. Boylston was threatened to the point where he had to hide in his house for 2 weeks while men who wanted him to hang came and searched for him. He was forced to see patients at night, disguised from those who opposed his ideas. Boylston continued to share said ideas, but most viewed it as murder. As the town of Boston was full of chaos and smallpox had infested the majority of houses, Boylston's work was ordered to stop. Once Boylston's son publicly survived inoculation, people began to see the light. Many pounded into Boston for the inoculations, and it gained so much popularity that these people had to be transferred out of Boston for the treatment. By the end of the 1721 epidemic, 247 to 282 people had been inoculated by Boylston, and some by Dr. Thompson and Dr. Robbie, who operated out of Cambridge and Charleston.
Mather was constantly abused for his ideas while being overworked. In November 1721, a bomb was thrown in his window with a message saying, "Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with a pox to you." Luckily, the bomb did not detonate, and Mather was able to continue his work. At the head of the anti-inoculation movement was Dr. William Douglas, who focused on the lack of trials and evidence to support inoculation actually working. He saw it as a way to create new cases and spread the disease, rather than a way to lessen the casualties. Other opposing arguments claimed that the inoculation process messed with God's plan and harmed the innocent. At this time, it was clear why inoculation was seen as unethical, seeing as it was dangerous and unresearched. During this time, tensions with the British were high in Boston. Political dysfunction led to the outbreak being so bad because nobody worked together. These politics took a turn in 1721 with the introduction of free press.
James and Benjamin Franklin made a newspaper called the New England Courant. These men saw the debate over inoculation as a reason to launch free press in the colonies because it was a popular topic. The newspaper tended to follow the popular opinion of inoculation, which meant that they criticized the process. Ben Franklin wrote under the name of Silence Dogood in the New England Courant, where he created racy and funny content. This led to great popularity, and the paper was able to reach a wide audience. The newspaper was published without proper permission from royal authorities, yet it was able to set back Mather and Boylston's work greatly. In Boston, Ben Franklin observed Boylston's experiment, and only years later would he advocate for inoculation. The introduction of free press to the colonies allowed for all people to spread their views on inoculation. Public opposition to inoculation in the press set back the experiments and use of inoculation initially. However, Boylston was also able to use the press to share the process and results of inoculation with others.
Inoculation trials in Boston during the epidemic showed hopeful results. Before inoculations, the fatality rate of naturally occurring smallpox was 14.8% out of 4,917 cases. Out of 287 people who were inoculated, only 2% died. Many people began to be inoculated, and Cotton Mather performed 248 himself. The only problem was that inoculations were expensive, and those who could not afford them would most likely die from contracting smallpox. In future epidemics, inoculation became an accepted procedure, and it was practiced in hospitals that were chartered by the governor. George Washington had his whole army inoculated, as was the British royal family.
An English scientist named Edward Jenner had observed Cotton Mather's studies of inoculation. He was impressed that many people were not contracting smallpox after being inoculated. However, he knew that some were still getting the disease. Jenner sought to improve the immunity of people around the world, as well as diminish the risk of contracting the disease because of the inoculation process. In 1796, Jenner examined cowpox, a similar, less deadly form of variola in milkmaids. Women working on cattle farms would contract a small virus and would soon recover with minimal scarring on the hands and fingers. Jenner inferred that since both smallpox and cowpox came from the same bacteria, injecting people with cowpox may be a better way to immunize patients.
He turned out to be correct. Cowpox not only gave people longer, more reliable immunity, it yielded a much better mortality rate than injecting actual smallpox bacteria into the recipient. The success of Jenner's experiment reached international fame as his vaccinations, named after the Latin word for cow, became accessible to almost all parts of the world. The debate over the legitimacy of vaccinations has intensified over the centuries. Some vaccinations have proven to be necessary, as they have prevented countless epidemics. However, religion, greedy pharmaceutical companies, and doubts about what the treatments really do have led people to become skeptical about vaccinations as a whole. Although different opinions were developed on whether or not vaccines should be a part of medicine, many lives have been saved by this incredible invention. The small colonial town of Boston, Massachusetts was the beginning of everything the world would know about vaccinations, and therefore changed the course of history as it is known today.